Welcome to On the Right Side of History with Kansans for Life. Come with us as we connect the pro-life movement's past to present, uncover hidden or forgotten history, and its connections to the battle still raging today. Now, here's our host, Danielle Underwood.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to On the Right Side of History with Kansans for Life. Today, I'm joined in studio by Jack Cashill and Peter Northcott. Jack Cashill is an independent producer, a documentary producer, a writer, a podcaster. He hosts the podcast Upstream with Cashill and Edge, and he has a PhD in American Studies from Purdue University, and he was even a former university professor back in another life, right?
Another life.
Another life. And many of you will recognize Jack from our very first podcast. He joined us to kind of launch the whole thing, and so we invited him back today to join us for this kind of overview discussion. We can think back about the things that we've been covering so far. We've got a lot of pieces to tie together. And we also have Peter Northcott here in the studio, and he is Executive Director of Kansans for Life. Before KFL, Peter, you worked in Kansas politics and the State House for almost a decade, including serving as Kansas Assistant State Treasurer. So welcome. I'm glad
Thanks,
to have
Danielle.
you.
Happy to be here on the hot seat this afternoon.
Very glad to have both of you here. So Jack, before we get started, you really kind of got us prepped and ready to launch this podcast. You helped to mentor us through the process.
Right.
You have a lot of experience doing media over the years. And I wondered if you could just tell us really quickly about your own podcast and kind of its relevance to our topic today.
Right. It's called Upstream. It's either Upstream Podcast on YouTube or Upstream with Cashill and Edge. But we took our title and our concept from the late, great Andrew Breitbart, who died in 2012, just a total pioneer in the world of conservative media. Him much missed. He was only, 40, 45 when he died of a heart attack. And for him, the quote was this: all politics is downstream from culture. So we wanted to go upstream, because politics, you're doing a podcast, everyone's talking about the same thing, and by tomorrow it's irrelevant. But the upstream part never goes away. And your line of work in particular, with Kansans for Life, the upstream right now is where I think you've got to focus your energy. Mm-hmm. The downstream changed weirdly after Roe was overturned. And you guys, in a sense, whether you wanted to or not, pioneered the backlash from all of that. But I think what you've been able to do with this series of podcasts is, for the audience and for you too, it's something of a focus group. You get to hear from people in all various stages of this process and find out what they're thinking. Because Kansas, I started with the first episode, Kansas pioneered the civil rights movement. It's the only state in America that was formed to end slavery. And it has a unique position right now to be the state that, God willing, begins the end of the abortion industry. And you guys have a lot of responsibility here, so we'll see what you do with it.
It is a big responsibility just to keep this discussion going and helping to bring more hearts and minds to discover the truth that really is the heart of the pro-life movement. And I think we're really glad to have you here. You have so much knowledge just historically, and you've been involved with this movement for a long time, and so I've really enjoyed getting to hear your stories. And you always bring such flair and fun. So we're very glad to have you back
thank
here.
You, Danielle.
Yeah. So I'm going to do something I don't typically do, and that's to just spend a little bit more time setting the stage for our listeners, just because some of them may have joined us, on podcast 9 or 10, and We've now, I believe this is the 12th, somewhere in there, podcast, and we've covered a lot of things. And I just wanted to quickly go back and explain that big picture. So that big picture is, we started by talking about the backdrop of Kansas history and the why. Why were we doing this podcast? That we needed a way to communicate directly with the people, unfiltered by media organizations that held a really deep bias against pro-life beliefs and goals. And we then we heard from some amazing people, some expertise that they brought, the powerful personal stories they've told, and we have more to come as well. We heard from an abortion survivor and a doctor who witnessed a born-alive incident after being called in for a code blue. We heard from a human trafficking victim advocate who told some powerful stories and helped us understand the connection between coerced abortions and the abortion industry and that trafficking system that has so many people, especially young people, trapped really in its grip. We heard from a citizen journalist who has been tracking dark money sources, trying to push pro-abortion agendas and even a pro-death agenda on Kansas and other states. We heard from the Attorney General who talked to us about pro-life laws that are currently being sued in our courts. And we heard from a legal scholar who talked about legislation that we can move forward that can actually save lives. They can actually make a difference in this fight. We heard from a former member of the editorial team of one of the largest newspapers in the state, and another guest who was with him who talked about media, the media landscape. And we heard from a national expert on the push toward death on demand in our country and others. So we've covered all of these topics, but we definitely see some common threads that tie these things together. I think that was really very obvious for me when I started listening, especially to the discussion on euthanasia and bioethics, and how there are so many parallels between that pro-death abortion, the forces that are pushing that pro-death agenda, and the pro-life struggle against the pro-abortion forces. Just really seeing how so many of the same tactics are being used against our position. So with that was a really quick, very, very fast tour through so many of our different topics. And I just wanted to now let you guys loose to start talking about some of the things that you've gleaned from those discussions and other things that tie together.
Peter?
Absolutely. Well, okay. Well, I thank you, Dr. Cashill. As many of our listeners, some of our listeners may know or may not know, I actually had the privilege of learning under your tutelage in high school.
Not much.
A couple of years as a professor teacher of journalism in my high school.
Right. I did a volunteer once a week exercise. Peter was one of my students for about 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And it was 1 day a week, and you guys are good. You're a lot of fun. It's too bad it was Padre Pio. It doesn't exist anymore. But
I'm guessing he was a star student.
Well, the eraser mark on his head probably testifies to the opposite of that. He was probably the last student in America ever hit by a flying eraser thrown by his teacher.
So this is a real story.
It's a real story.
This is a real story.
And he deserved it. He knew it. But
he just couldn't quite get it into my head to start using more active sentences instead of passive sentences. So
I had to demonstrate it with a flying eraser as the active voice. So.
Exactly. So I thank you so much. Such an honor to be on the show with you and Danielle. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful, this podcast that's come together, and I think it's just a lot of it has to do with we've had so many great people that are willing to come forward and share stories and their perspective about the life movement, the history, where we've come from, where we're going. I just think the common thread, I mean, not to plug the podcast again, but Dr. Cashill's podcast, Upstream, referring to the culture being so upstream from politics, but this podcast hasn't just touched on politics. It's talked about the change in what some people saw as the healthcare delivery system. Eben Fowler, having worked for a pharmaceutical company that started producing the abortion pill.
Right.
I mean, that's not it's had an impact on politics, but it's the culture that led to the creation of the abortion pill. That directly impacted Evan's story. And as we know, the abortion pill has become so prolific in the push to spread that to pharmacies across the nation. It demonstrates where our culture currently is at this point. Or, we have Wesley Smith on the podcast talking about the push for death on demand and this feeling of individuals wanting to feel like they have to have physician-assisted suicide, this need for control, that we're pressed by our broader culture to feel like we have to be in control of everything at every single moment. So I think it really is a sharing of the stories that's been directly impacted from our culture that's led us to really the conversation that we're having here today.
Yeah. There's you had some excellent guests on. And they covered areas that, as a totality, make you think if everyone in America listened to the whole series, they would have what's called the red pill moment. And you're familiar with that concept. Your audience may not be. Let me just explain it because it's now very much in the news. It comes from the movie The Matrix, where Morpheus, the mentor to Neo, the acolyte, says to him, you have a choice between two pills in your life you could take. If you take the blue pill, you'll wake up tomorrow morning and everything will seem okay, just like it is right now. If you take the red pill, you're going to wake up and see that everything is not as it should be, and it's going to take you down a rabbit hole. And it will open your eyes. Well, why I am somewhat optimistic is because we've had in the last few years some major red pill successes. I think the most important one, and this may not impact directly on this right now, was Elon Musk. And his started, as many did, Naomi Wolf, Simone Gold, others, with COVID. When they realized that the pro-abortion mantra, my body, my choice, was a charade, it was a fraud. It was just a bunch of words because they were willing to sacrifice their bodies and their choice to the state. That's what turned Elon Musk. And then once he took the blinders off, he had been an Obama fanboy. And then he began to see how the culture was operating in other ways. It was suppressing free speech. It was doing, turning a blind eye to illegal immigration. It was doing all kinds of things that made no sense once he had taken that red pill. And that's where we are now. We need our key influencers. It's happening. People like Joe Rogan and Brett Weinstein and Dave Rubin. These are people who are, born again conservatives once they've taken that red pill. We need to get them involved in the life movement because that's their final liberal kind of stronghold. The last thing they want to give up. And I think. Like I say, with your show, with the podcast, you're exposing a lot of people. If they're watching, they're going to say at the end of that series, how did I ever support the abortion movement? And that's where we need to go, I think, just me.
Well, I think what you're seeing is the abortion industry has become so radical. They for years, it was, to your point, they focused on the word choice over and over again. But now they've gotten to the point where they're abandoning the concept of choice. For example, with them attacking our informed consent law, our Women's Right to Know Act. It's in the name itself, the Women's Right to Know, which doesn't say that a woman can't have an abortion, but it does require that she receive accurate information about the abortion procedure, potential health risks, information about the abortionists themselves, if they've had any sanctions against them, and information of that sort, and yet the abortion industry can't stand that. It's not about choice, it's about no choice, and that choice is abortion. And you see the abortion industry, for years they would attack pro-lifers and say that, we only cared about the child, we didn't care about the mother. As time has moved on, of course, the pro-life movement has looked at limitations on the abortion industry, but the pro-life side has always been there with pregnancy resource centers wanting to help women through difficult situations. I've yet to see the pregnancy center that Planned Parenthood or the abortion industry is sponsoring. They are not there to help women or walk with families if they choose not to have an abortion. It's this constant push towards just having an abortion. And I think as a movement moving forward, I think exposing the fact that it's not the pro-choice industry, they're the no-choice industry, I think that's what's going to help continue to grow our movement and bring in some of these individuals who might not have seen themselves being associated with our issue whatsoever, moving our direction.
Yeah, right. Once the blinders are off, it's a possible way for them to come over. Because, I mean, before put those blinders on, they're not going to even begin to think. Now, the challenge for you guys, I'd like to throw this question out because I don't work for Kansans for Life. You are right now in a sort of a pivotal state. You're the state that pioneered the Post-Roe Era, whether you wanted to or not. And it's so far we hear about all the defeats and all the electoral defeats, and we see a lot of it has to do with just their manipulation of the language and the use of dark money, et cetera. But at KFL now, what do you tell the people of Kansas? What is your focus going to be? Because you can only do so much. And so you'll obviously have to keep your hands on a lot of things, but where is your energy going to go? What is it that you hope to accomplish? So that way, donors, please send your money to Kansans for Life. No, I mean, it's a question I'm sure you ask yourself every day. But you're in a very visual seat now, right? You're the avatar of this new era. And what are you going to tell the rest of the PFLs and the NJFLs and the NDFLs about what a statewide organization can do?
One of the things we're trying to do is to make sure that we communicate more directly that we are the side with true care and compassion for women who are experiencing difficult pregnancies or unexpected pregnancies. That's something that we realized had been really taken from us and unwarranted, but that the other side had somehow claimed that abortion was the compassionate choice, the compassionate thing to offer women. And so we're really working hard to make sure that we unify the pro-life movement to communicate that message, that we are here to defend vulnerable women from an oftentimes predatory industry that sees their vulnerability and has really taken and created the social movement almost as its advertising strategy to sell more abortions. You know, like Peter was saying, that women are told that abortion is their only choice, that, you know, somehow that if they don't go that path, that they're going to be giving up their future, their dreams, their everything.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that we're working on, other than, you know, everything we can do to save more lives. And that is to provide those kind of resources and the true help that women need to be able to make life-saving choices.
Mm-hmm. So you're asking the right question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We're in the post-Roe era. The whole idea that Roe versus Wade was overturned, I think it's nothing short of it is a miracle. If you look at a movement that has started at church basements and at kitchen tables, the most grassroots of the grassroots, fighting against the vast media infrastructure, the money, all of that,
Right.
endurance over 50 years. So you have this long buildup. Roe versus Wade was overturned, and now we're in this new era. To your point, Kansas being really went through the first battle. And so in the days after the amendment's failure to pass, there's a lot of soul searching, a lot of prayer that goes into this. But ultimately, I think it comes back to us fully embracing the mantra of being pro-life. You know, we're not an anti-abortion organization. We are a pro-life organization that values life. So in our organization has always had multiple wings. We're not just a lobbying organization. We have a educational side of our organization. Of course, we have political action that individuals across the state are familiar with, but it's embracing the pro-life mantra. So there are laws that we can pass that hold the abortion industry accountable. We've seen that in the last year with our Born Alive Protection Act, which not only is it good law to have in place, but it's also a tool that can be used to educate the public about the extreme practices of the abortion industry and survivors. Education continues to be an issue. We have to change hearts and minds if you're going to impact public policy.
Yeah, and changing hearts and minds, and this goes back to where the media are. I'll just give you a story from, this is 2006. It was a big year in Kansas history, partly because that was the year that Phil Klein was being pilloried in the media, and they stopped him from being reelected to Attorney General. He was doing great work. And I was doing some sort of youth forum in 2006, right afterwards, with Dave Helling of Kansas City Star. And at that time, Kansas City Star still mattered somewhat. And the kid asked Helling, he goes, what is, and they were 16, 18-year-olds, whatever. He said, what's your position? What's the Star's position on abortion? He goes, well, we're right down the middle on that subject. We're right down the middle. And I just burst out laughing. I was really inappropriate. I said, Dave, you guys just won the Maggie Award, honored by Planned Parenthood for your commitment to reproductive rights. You were number one in the country. And they were, literally. And it's, well, those legacy media are vanishing. They're losing their influence by the day. And this is where I think, and that's good. That's real good, because you're not going to be able to turn a newsroom around. But you can turn an individual around. I'm going to give you an example now of what to me is the ultimate wish dream for if I were capable of doing this. We're broadcasting from Kansas City. It was 2 days before the Super Bowl. And a lot of people have objected to the Taylor Swift presence in the Chiefs and the show box up above the stadium. She's come to all the games. She's involved deeply, romantically, with one of our stars, Travis Kelce, who is now the best-known pro football player in the world because of that.
Easily, yeah.
Yeah. And I had mixed feelings about this. And then I saw them I was watching the show after they beat Baltimore for the AFC Championship. And she comes out, she looks like a schoolgirl. And she just wraps her arms around Travis Kelce, who's, she's tall, but he's 6'4", or even about 8 inches tall or whatever. And I had this momentary thought, there is hope for romantic love still, even in the jaded world that she has lived in for the last 15 years. She's 33 or 4 years old. She's ready, right? This isn't just an act of convenience. And so she was at that moment showing all the little girls in the world who follow her, and that's her base, that there's a hope, that there is romance and there's love, right? Heterosexual, right? Real and spontaneous. Now, of course, she's on the wrong side of this issue. What if you flipped her? Being on the wrong side of this issue that's where she's expected to be, so it doesn't have that much impact. But if you flipped her, then of course she'd probably lose her career, but she's probably ready to move on. She's worth $1 billion anyhow. She's just an example. There are influencers now who have much more power than major newsrooms. Tucker Carlson has more power than the New York Times. He got the interview with Putin. Those are the people, I think, that give us hope that we can begin to turn. We don't have to work against corporate legacy interests who are buying billions of dollars, getting supported by Pfizer and Moderna and all these other companies. Travis Kelce is doing Pfizer ads, but that's another story. We just need to reach certain key people. I mean, we don't just need to, but that gives us a hope that we never had before.
So back to your point about Elon Musk, I would have more hope for him potentially becoming a more vocal proponent of our side, because he is the one who's come out and publicly talked about how population rates are crashing around the world,
right,
and how that can be an unstoppable cycle if you don't intervene in time. So I think he's got the big idea.
Well, he's certainly pro-life. He's contributed 10 children, but if you read his history, it's not necessarily in conventional ways. But his point is well made. And and he's, like I say, it would be nice if we could reorient, get that stream back into the channel, and have people get married and have children. Just thinking about that planning as you go through life. If you get married and stay married, you'll never be poor. It's kind of ridiculous that way. I'm moving into that phase where I realize now I don't have to do anything anymore. All I have to do is stay married, and I'm good. You each get a Social Security pension, whatever. You live charmed lives. And that's, I think, part of the larger message that needs to go out there. And that's just selling of the conventional, traditional morality and its benefits. Because at the end of the day, you have grandchildren. And that is the ultimate payoff, right? The price God's reward for not killing your own children when they're adolescents, and so it's a whole big picture to sell, and there are methods now that weren't available before.
Yeah, and to your point too, I think there is that. I think that pendulum is swinging back.
Yeah.
Where there is a group of people who are becoming more vocal to reclaim that idea of, a solid family structure
Right.
that is a permanent family structure and a traditional family structure, and how beautiful that is.
Yeah.
So I think there is hope. To your point, I think it's just we need to keep communicating that, and it is part of the larger. Maybe that is an upstream topic in and of itself for you.
Right. And you see people like, when I listen to podcasts, I listen to young people like, young people to me, Ben Shapiro, old people to you maybe, Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh. They all are strong family proponents, and they make a point of it all the time. And they have, very strong audiences. You hear from Kansas City, someone like Jason Whitlock, who, is a sort of renegade black sportscaster, is now hugely pro-life. Although he's not necessarily, he hasn't gotten his family stuff together, but he knows he should, So there's hope. I think the culture has reached a point where it is flipping back, but it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick, and there's a lot of battles ahead.
Yeah, I think as it becomes more evident, just the brokenness in our culture, that it's going to become all the more attractive to see that kind of lasting love and what that does, and even generationally, and the whole generation of people who were sold on the idea of having freedom rather than children.
Right.
But seeing what happens when you get to the later part of your life and what the ultimate payoff or lack of payoff is for making that kind of life choice.
That's right.
So, if we're talking about, we've seen how so many forces are working against the pro-life movement. So, with all of that, how are we still here? I think I want us to focus for a second on all of the amazing strength and resilience that we've seen, both over the decades and now. What we're seeing that continues to give us hope and continue. Obviously, Peter, you and I are working in this daily. I mean, we've got to have something that recharges our batteries to keep going, because, nobody wants to fight a futile fight. So obviously we do not believe that we're in any kind of futility, cycle here, but we believe that we have victory ahead. So let's talk about that.
Peter?
Well, I just look at any human rights struggle throughout history. They've always had their ups and they have their downs. Any human rights struggle, you're fighting against the current, to keep going with the analogy. For us, I mean, joy is a choice, and joy is something that's required of fighting in this battle every single day. But ultimately, when the truth is on your side, truth will ultimately come out in the end. Again, every human rights struggle, they've been on the side of truth, and ultimately that truth has prevailed. And I just look, as time goes on, you're looking at the proliferation of, specifically focusing on the abortion industry. They can't keep selling the lie forever. We have a society that right at this current point in time that is one of the most most unhappy in human history, at least by current measurement. In our modern society, with everything that we have, with all the conveniences and everything, there is this broad unhappiness. And ultimately, what do most people value above anything else? It is the family.
Right.
Most studies will show, what do people see as the most valuable thing in their lives? It's some sort of family.
Right.
And ultimately, that's what our issue is about, is the family, and it's the continuation of the human family. And of course, the preborn child is a part of our family. And we can't continue to discard them if we're ultimately trying to have a happy, healthy society. So I just believe that ultimately, the other side, the lie will reach a point, and then things will continue to move back in our direction. And so that's what gives me hope and joy, and every single day why we continue to do this. And it's just the fact that we have so many good people you meet in this. Sometimes you see the worst sides of people, but ultimately you're going to see the best sides of people really giving of themselves to be a part of this movement. And the most powerful people in this fight right now are individuals that have a story to share.
Right.
Whether they were maybe had a different perspective on life, whether they were if they had something that happened to them related to the abortion industry, those people, the more and more they come forward and they share their personal stories about why, the agenda of the abortion industry was not the best choice for them, the more that's shared, we're going to continue to bring more and more people to our side. So ultimately, I think that's what keeps me going, each day in this fight.
Well, in my case, I lived through that whole transition, and I fell, at least to a certain degree, for the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll culture of the 60s, 70s. And it took me a while. And I was kind of a libertarian, so I made the libertarian argument that, hey, we should, my body, my choice, that sort of thing. But I remember having a discussion with some friends, who liberal friends, and I said to them at one point, I said, I'm with you guys on this, I'm pro choice, et cetera. But they've got the moral high ground. Well, let's admit that. And they flipped out because they didn't want their morality challenged. Because fundamentally, we all share the same Judeo-Christian morality, even if we don't actively, endorse it. And that what that means is that every time a person makes this kind of decision I made, they don't go back. Once you realize that you were on the wrong side of history, you're not going back. I don't know a single person who's flipped the other way. I don't know a single person who said, I used to be pro-life, Jack, but now I see the wisdom of being pro-choice. That doesn't happen unless you're a Democrat and you're running for office. Like Emanuel Cleaver or like so many other, Ted Kennedy and others people who
Joe
were.
Biden.
Joe Biden, yeah, right. He doesn't remember whether he was pro-life or pro-choice, sad thing. He shouldn't be president, but, he'd make a great storyteller in your local nursing home. But that's our strength. And I think given the position you guys are in, where you have a sort of a responsibility every morning to get up, and you're on the right side of history. So it's like being John Brown in 1860. You wake up and say, "No, I'm going to be pro-slavery now." That movement is, Harper's Ferry didn't work out. That's not going to happen. Or the other great leaders of Martin Luther King waking up. Oh, I got a job offer from ABC. No, I think I'll give that a close up. And no, when you're on the right side of history, you got to keep going. There's a momentum there that you cannot deny.
Yeah, and I think you're really right in that we look at the people who have left, as workers in the abortion industry who have left that line
Right.
of work, and especially anyone who is actively an abortionist and then has that awakening,
Right.
has that total change of heart. You never see it going the other way.
No.
Just like you're saying.
No, there's no Bernard Nathanson
No.
of the opposite direction.
Well, I just think so. Doing pro-life work, you get to meet a lot of people, and I've had a number of conversations with women that have had abortions, and they talk about some of them have gone through a healing process, some of them haven't. In the last couple of months, I had a conversation with a woman that it sticks with me, and I think about this every day. She said, I had an abortion. I was young. My child was around, 17 weeks gestation at the time. The doctors told me that though this was, it's just a clump of cells. And she says, the thing that sticks with me is everybody in their life has things that they wish they could do over. Anybody,
Sure.
She's like, my one do-over is that I no longer have my oldest child.
Right.
And, no matter what we're being fed through various media sources, all of that is something that you just can't cover up. The fact that you look at, she has a wonderful family now and has had a very successful career in business, but all of that, she thinks, I would trade all of that if I could just have my one do-over. I do think that we need to have a real conversation about what an abortion is. That's the one thing that in the media and all the broader landscape is they won't have this conversation using very sterilized words. Mm-hmm. Of course, from a pro-life perspective, you always want to meet your audience where they are. But I do think we need to have the conversation about an abortion, besides the procedure itself, is those long-term impacts. It's always framed as it's a snap decision choice, short period of time, and we move on.
Right.
There's nothing about the long-term implications. So I think if we have an honest conversation with the broader public about what an abortion is, which is not just a moment in time and something that happens at one point in time. An abortion is something it's something that takes place, and it's repercussions that are over decades.
Yes,
and if we could
it affects a
and
woman.
if we have that real conversation, through sources like our podcast and other places, that's how you're going to bring people to our side.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I mean, that's true of a lot of family issues like divorce, for instance. My grandchildren went to Thanksgiving with both sets of their natural grandparents. How many kids get that opportunity today? Because abortion, like divorce, once it happens, it goes down generations. It never recovers completely. You can never rebuild fully what you lost. But it's going to be a challenge. I would make one recommendation to your core audience, and that is the people who are naturally listening to this and watching this. I live in Missouri, so I sort of wasn't involved in the Value Them Both amendment. The petty back sniping that was going on afterwards was depressing, right? This is too big an issue to trivialize. I mean, they have to recognize, your supporters who are political have to recognize this is new territory. You're not going to do everything perfectly right out. Even you might have done everything perfectly, the outcome might have been exactly the same. You cannot fritter away your energies with internecine BS. That's the other side feasts on that. Mm-hmm. Satan feasts on that. And that your audience can fix just by giving people the grace of understanding that their opinion may be different from yours or their strategies might be different. And they should pray for your success, our mutual success, instead of trying to score political points on Facebook. There are better ways to spend your energies.
Our movement has to be united at this point in time.
Right.
I mean, as I said, with all the going through all the podcasts, you look at all the forces that are against the pro-life movement at this point in time. We have to have a united effort moving forward because, look, there are lives on the line, and they're dependent on us to continue to do good work. As flawed as we might be, none of us are perfect, but the idea that we just keep moving forward in the battle, I think, is key, and that's what pro-lifers have done before Roe versus Wade in that time, in the days after Roe versus Wade, and that's what we're going to keep doing here in this post-Dobbs era.
Right. Mm-hmm. Danielle, what was your takeaway? I mean, you were the one who sat through these. I mean, you were the closest one to the exchange of information.
Well, I think one of the things that hit me was the true courage that so many people do have. They just need an opportunity to come forward and share whatever that is, that whatever their expertise is or whatever their personal experience, whatever their story is. And I think that they're, with the belief that God is in control and that truth will win in the end, I just believe that these strengths are going to all come together and that we will, as long as we do seek unity. And, like you're saying, division is a tool of our enemy.
Right.
And it is really important that we all bring the gifts we have, the talents we have, and that we put them to use. And we realize we don't have to do this perfectly. We just need to be committed. We need to always seek to improve. We've got to seek to find better ways to communicate with the people who can't hear this message yet, but it's just because the time isn't right. Maybe they haven't had that experience in their life yet. That's going to make them stop and listen and be open to hearing things that is counter to most of what they're being told, being sold to them by the culture, by the media, by those stars who want to sell this pro-abortion message. But it's really an empty promise that they're giving. And once people realize how empty what they are being led into is, I think then they will embrace the truth and the beauty of the pro-life movement and what we're wanting to do. And that's really to just say every person's life matters and everyone should be respected from, when they're in the womb to a natural death. So
that was well said, Danielle. I'm in awe of your new gifts as a podcaster here. You've done very well with this.
Well, thanks for coaching me. Yeah, well, okay. So this is anything else we want to talk about just to give hope and inspiration to people to keep on. I do want to say, I think you brought up a good point, Peter, about how people's stories are going to be so instrumental in this. We realize that our culture is moved by emotion, even more so than it is by logic these days, and that we need to find ways to make sure that people hear the stories, the true stories that will move them to open their minds and hearts. So I would say, if any of our listeners have knowledge of that incredible, powerful story that they would feel courageous enough to come forward and share, please contact us. Let us know. We would love to hear your story. And if it's something that's the right fit for this, we would love to bring you on and give you a place to share that.
Because one thing we all have looked for since the beginning of time are heroes. I mean, heroes are the center of virtually every epic ever written over the last however many years people have been writing or talking or speaking. And there are no heroes on their side, right? We've got all the heroes. And you're right. We just got to find them and surface them. Mm-hmm. People want to hear from them because they can make an individual with a heroic story can make a huge difference. And so, yeah, it's a good recruiting call.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No. One of the stats you'll see, there's a lot of public polling out there that shows at least 60% of the public have either had an abortion or they know somebody that's had an abortion. So I think it's understanding that when folks are going to the polls, they're taking their pain with them to the polls. When you're seeing public opinion on this issue, there's a lot of pain that's involved. So I think it's understanding from our perspective is we have an environment out there that there's a lot of people that are very, very hurt. So when we talk about this issue, of course, we're going to talk about the extremism of the abortion industry, but it's also understanding that, our words matter. And I think these stories are going to help show people that there is a better way. And I think ultimately that's the positive side of our movement. That's why we're the pro-life movement. We're not the anti-abortion movement. The positive side and the ultimate vision that we're putting forward is why we can ultimately win, because the other side, what do they have to offer? It's the practices, the abortion industry, it's physician-assisted suicide, it's that ultimate end. It's a losing strategy, whereas ultimately ours is a winning strategy.
I mean, right, they're eliminating their future. I mean, I once wrote an article called "The Liberals Without Grandparents," without grandchildren, rather, because they were of an age where they'd have a child or maybe two and spoil them or whatever, but their children wouldn't bother. And so by the time they're now 60, 70 years old, that's it. It's the end of the line. Mm-hmm. And they don't realize it until then. So it's the reward. It's like being on top of a pyramid. I had a friend at church. I remember going. They had their 60th anniversary. I knew they had a bunch of kids, and I knew some of them. And I said to the husband, I said, "How many grandchildren you guys got?" He goes, "Ask her." So I go over and ask his wife, "How many grandchildren do you have?" 71, right? And they become party animals now. They go to every week is a first communion or
life is
wedding,
never
confirmation.
Boring.
It's
never boring.
And they're the center of attention. And you can't accomplish that by disposing of the ones that seem inconvenient early on.
Mm-hmm.
So because once you have a child, you don't want to go back.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jack and Peter. For this opportunity today to get together and talk more about what we've covered so far, where we're going, why it matters, and just the larger conversation about the culture. I think it was enlightening. It was great to talk with you all. So, and thank you all to joining us today. If you are looking for a way to help the pro-life movement grow today, please share this podcast with a friend or a family member, anyone you think will be interested. And if you want to stay up to date on this and all pro-life topics, please visit kfl.org and sign up to receive our updates. That's kfl.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, now called X, Instagram, and TikTok at Kansans for Life. And you can also find Upstream with Jack, with Cashill and Edge.
Cashill and Edge, right.
Where you find many other podcasts. What platforms are you on?
Just about all of them.
All of them? So look out for Jack as well. And as we say goodbye, never forget, the pro-life movement is on the right side of history. Truth always wins in the end. We hope you'll join us next time. Thank you.